By 1917, the German army had been at war for nearly 3 years. What began as a campaign of movement had hardened into a vast system of trenches stretching from the North Sea to the Swiss frontier. Along this front, industrial warfare reached a level of intensity unseen in earlier conflicts. Artillery fire reshaped landscapes. Infantry assaults became measured in yards gained or lost. Innovation focused not on speed, but on breaking stalemate. Among the weapons developed to solve this problem was the flamethrower. Germany was the first nation to deploy flamethrowers in combat on a systematic scale. By the middle years of the war, flamethrowers had become a specialized tool of assault units, tasked with clearing trenches, bunkers, and fortified positions that resisted conventional infantry attacks. These weapons were not issued broadly. They were operated by specially trained pioneer troops assigned to carefully planned assaults. The flamethrower was not intended to dominate the battlefield. Its range was short. Its endurance was limited. Its value lay in shock, both physical and psychological. Used at the right moment, it could force defenders from positions that had held against artillery and rifle fire for weeks. But this same weapon placed its operators among the most exposed soldiers on the front. German flamethrower units in 1917 were typically organized in small teams. Depending on the model, a team might consist of 2 to 4 men. One operated the nozzle, others carried fuel, maintained pressure, or provided immediate protection. Their equipment was heavy, conspicuous, and fragile under fire. Once deployed, flamethrower teams became priority targets for enemy riflemen and machine gunners. Survival depended on coordination, timing, and the ability to reach enemy trenches before being detected. By 1917, the German army had refined the use of flamethrowers through experience at Verdun, the Somme, and earlier, fighting in Flanders. Flamethrowers were often integrated into storm troop tactics, short, violent assaults aimed at penetrating enemy defenses rather than holding ground indefinitely. These methods emphasized speed, initiative, and decentralized decision-making. However, even under ideal conditions, flamethrower crews faced extreme risk. The fuel tanks they carried were vulnerable to small arms fire. While popular mythology often exaggerates the likelihood of tanks exploding when hit, penetrating rounds could rupture hoses, disable pressure systems, or ignite fuel under certain conditions. More commonly, crews were simply killed by concentrated fire before they could bring the weapon to bear. Casualty rates among flamethrower troops were consistently higher than among standard infantry units assigned similar missions. In 1917, the Western Front saw some of the most intense fighting of the war. The Battle of Arras, the Third Battle of Ypres, and repeated, localized assaults along the Aisne and Flanders sectors placed enormous strain on all combat arms. Flamethrowers were employed in many of these operations, particularly during trench raids and limited attacks designed to improve tactical positions rather than achieve strategic breakthroughs. It is within this environment that photographs and reports emerge showing fallen German soldiers beside flamethrower equipment. One such image, often circulated with the caption "German flamethrower team killed 1917, shows 2 German soldiers lying dead near what appears to be flamethrower apparatus. The setting suggests a ruined rural structure, possibly a farmhouse or outbuilding, consistent with Western Front combat zones in France or Belgium. The equipment visible resembles earlier, heavier flamethrower systems still in use alongside newer models during this period. The image itself provides no captioned date, unit identification, or location. This absence of metadata is not unusual. Many wartime photographs were taken by soldiers or embedded photographers without detailed documentation. Others were separated from original captions during post-war archiving. As a result, historians must rely on contextual analysis rather than definitive attribution. What can be stated with confidence is that the image depicts genuine battlefield casualties involving German soldiers and flamethrower equipment. It aligns with known patterns of flamethrower deployment and loss during the middle years of the war. Whether the photograph shows a specific documented incident from 1917 cannot be confirmed with absolute certainty. This distinction matters. Military history relies on verifiable evidence. While individual flamethrower teams were undoubtedly killed throughout 1916, 17, and 18, not every such event was recorded in unit diaries or after-action reports. Flamethrower detachments were small. Their losses were often absorbed into broader casualty figures rather than noted as separate incidents. The German Army did maintain records of flamethrower units, including the Guard Reserve Pioneer formations responsible for their operation. These records confirm substantial losses over the course of the war. They also confirm that 1917 saw continued use of flamethrowers, despite mounting Allied countermeasures. By this stage of the war, Allied troops had adapted to the threat. Training manuals emphasized immediate engagement of flamethrower operators. Snipers were instructed to watch for fuel tanks and hoses. Artillery observers learned to identify likely staging areas for assault teams. Once detected, flamethrower crews rarely survived long. This adaptation reduced the tactical impact of flamethrowers while increasing their cost. German command nevertheless continued to employ them, particularly in limited attacks where surprise could still be achieved. The calculus remained the same, a high-risk tool for high-value objectives. The deaths of flamethrower crews were not considered unusual by contemporaries. They were accepted as part of the operational cost of assault warfare. Post-war memoirs from German veterans occasionally reference flamethrower teams being wiped out before reaching enemy lines. These accounts are typically brief, matter-of-fact, and devoid of dramatic emphasis. They reflect the brutal normalization of loss by the war's middle years. The photograph associated with the claim German flamethrower team killed 1917 fits squarely within this historical reality. It does not depict an extraordinary event. It depicts a common outcome of a dangerous role performed under extreme conditions. What elevates the image in modern memory is not its uniqueness, but its clarity. It captures the vulnerability of men tasked with carrying one of the war's most feared weapons. It strips away myth and replaces it with the physical reality of industrial warfare, bodies on the ground, equipment abandoned, purpose rendered meaningless by death. By 1917, such scenes were no longer shocking to those who lived through them. They were routine. Yet they remain significant to historians because they illustrate the limits of technological solutions to strategic problems. Flamethrowers did not break the trench deadlock. They did not deliver decisive victory. They provided localized advantage at disproportionate human cost. This lesson would echo into later conflicts. The image also underscores a broader truth about military innovation. Weapons designed to terrify the enemy often place extraordinary strain on those who wield them. The psychological burden carried by flamethrower operators was immense. Allied soldiers regarded them with fear and hatred. Capture often meant execution. Survival required both physical courage and acceptance of likely death. In this sense, flamethrower troops occupied a grim space between weapon and soldier, valued for its effect, expendable in practice. The question posed, German flamethrower team killed 1917, cannot be answered with a simple yes or no. The historical record does not support identification of a single famous incident corresponding to that caption, but it does support the broader truth the image represents. German flamethrower teams were killed repeatedly in 1917. They died in small numbers, in forgotten sectors, during attacks that shifted front lines by meters rather than miles. Their deaths were recorded statistically, not narratively. Their stories survive primarily through fragments, photographs, brief mentions, and the equipment left behind. This is often how industrial war is remembered, not through individual names, but through accumulated evidence of loss. In studying such images, historians must balance skepticism with empathy. Claims must be tested. Context must be reconstructed. But the human reality depicted should not be dismissed simply because documentation is incomplete. The men in the photograph were real. They wore German uniforms. They carried flamethrower equipment. They were killed in combat on the Western Front. That much is certain. What remains unknowable, their names, their unit, the precise date, reflects not failure of history, but the scale of the war itself. Millions served. Millions died. Most left no detailed record behind. The photograph endures because it compresses this vast experience into a single frame. It reminds us that behind every weapon system, doctrine, and tactical diagram stood individuals whose lives ended far from strategic objectives or post-war narratives. Their deaths shaped the war not through grand victories, but through cumulative exhaustion and attrition. In 1917, the war continued because men like these were sent forward again and again. And in that sense, the image does not ask us to remember a single event. It asks us to understand a system.